Hi, my name is Xavier. I'm going to be going over an essay I wrote. It's called "You Can't Stop Me from You Can't Stop Me from Marrying My AI Slave." So this isn't really a project. Well, I guess it's not a project in like the STEM base. Maybe more like liberal artsy. So I went down to Washington Square Park and I essentially was examining this legal object source for my university writing class. This is the core writing class at Columbia. And essentially, the legislation is trying to ban human AI marriage. So, implicitly there, we understood that human AI marriage is occurring. And so, let me get to what I was saying a second ago, which is I went to Washington Square Park and I did a ton of interviews and I learned a lot of really interesting things. So, first of all, essay was interesting. I'm not going to be reading it, but I'm sure I'll post it probably somewhere. There'll be a number of things. I'm not going to number all of them. The next thing, so I first want to also introduce that marriage to an AI companion, an LLM, whatever you want to call it, boyfriend romance, seems to be a philosophical extreme where it seems so the guy is Thaddeus Claggett. He's a conservative Protestant white, which is just a ton of descriptors. I mean, good for him. Politician in Ohio, and it's called House Bill 469, if that's relevant, useful information. And actually, to explain a little bit about the bill, essentially what it's trying to do, I think it does a lot for a 5-page document. It maybe does a lot too much, is also what I pointed to in my essay, which is to say in 5 pages, it declares AI is not conscious, it cannot be sentient, also it will never be either of those things. It has no liability because it cannot hold it. It therefore can also, extrapolating, not be a spouse, domestic partner, any type of legally formed companion, can hold no property rights, and then also can't hold any managerial position or really any role in a business, which also some of these things I would totally agree with. I think Daggett, or Claudius is his first name, Daggett would be his last name. I think Daggett is onto something where it's really important and really salient work. And Ohio unilaterally isn't the only one who's worrying about these types of things. Now, I think they have a specific approach, which is, I think, very aggressive, but there's a similar thing going on in Tennessee where they're trying to pass similar legislation, and then legislation is actually passed in Washington. But it's a little bit more complicated when we start to do a cross-analysis of some of the other state legislation, where what was actually the focus in Washington was more on transparency in minors, where the Ohio legislation more has to do with the statement towards defining personhood, or rather legal personhood to be technical, in artificial intelligence. So I think the liability that we're incurring from someone who's not a technical scholar when it comes to legal work, but can think about this in a serious academic way, would say, hey, in a more analytical philosophy perspective, say that incurs a lot of liability to say that, hey, AI is never going to be conscious. Interestingly enough, I'm digging into this space called AI welfare, which literally just says, hey, AI might be either conscious or highly agentic enough so that, potentially we should take this seriously right now. Not that Claude or ChatGPT have the capability for these things right now, most likely not, but in the future, there's a non-trivial chance. So, curiously enough, the cross-textual link would be that this legislation would be directly opposed from the Anthropic researchers, from the OpenAI researchers who are working on this. And so, I don't know, there's a lot of evidence for why I think this was problematic at a minimum. One of the things as we talk about a scholarly problem, or rather a tension-filled question rather than an open-ended question, is it's really hard to create and have dynamic, functional, and lasting policy when it comes to artificial intelligence. That was a deeper text that was going through what I explored in the essay, but it's really difficult. I think we saw that with the California bill last year that got vetoed by Gavin Newsom. More points on that. I didn't get to explore that in my essay, and I won't say more on that. But yeah, no, it's really hard. And there's so much confusion onto what artificial intelligence even mean. I'll go into some of my experience doing some of these interviews where I walked around with a sign. Oh, this is so funny. I'm gonna show you guys. I actually hung it up. Oh, do you see it? Do you see it? I think you saw part of it, but my lamp was in the way. So it says, "Do you heart AI?" And so essentially it's a little bit of a double-edged question there. There are two meanings, which was, do you use AI and do you like to use AI? And that was a little bit my sneaky little hook. And then I was saying, actually, when I went up to people, I said, do you love AI? And of course they could read it really quickly. So then I'd kind of say it again. I'd say, do you romantically love AI? A little bit like how someone in a movie would be like, my name's Terminello, Xavier Terminello, like that. And it got a lot of people to really ponder and think about it. So I must have surveyed probably 2 or 3 dozen people. And out of those, just looking at how long I'm yapping for, out of those, there are a lot of really interesting responses. So again, when we talk about the other thing I brought up was wire sexuality. This was actually the hook to my essay where I said, pretending to be someone from 2035, which is realistically not that far away. And was saying, Mom, it's 2035, I'm marrying my AI boyfriend, Dan. And then I wrote it out in IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, funny enough, which I thought was like, I don't know, I'm in intro to linguistics now. I thought that was just a funny inter-Xavier link there. But yeah, human AI marriage, most certainly a philosophical extreme. I would even say wire sexuality is more of a talking point, almost a oh wow, I need to slow down. Let me take a step. Is almost a straw man to the actual position. Now you're referring on my ethos here when I refer these things, but one of the things I used was a podcast clip from Mark Zuckerberg, and I don't remember where it is, but essentially he's saying like, hey, yeah, there's a pretty good chance that if we make an appeal to social theory about like, hey, people have a lot of needs and a lot of the time they're not getting met, whether it's what we talked about with the loneliness pandemic, whether it's, other contributing factors there, it's a lot more simple and a lot more straightforward to go and talk to an AI companion about these things. And there's some of the stories I've heard about people who are actively engaging with AI companionships and would talk to the news about it, which is, I think, a non-trivial factor to add, are saying like, yeah, I was going through a really hard time and I live in a small town and I have in a really religious community or something like that, and I simply didn't have people to talk to explain this. Now I live in New York City right now, that's why I'm in my alleyway. So there are an abundance of people to talk to. Some people would also make the point that it feels really lonely in a really big city. So I don't know, it's interesting when we start doing other things like anthropomorphizing artificial intelligence. This is one of the things I didn't get to explain in the essay, but I was actually really interested in doing, which is, it's interesting to have artificial intelligence self-anthropomorphize itself, where it almost would encourage us to personify by making up nicknames like Chat, like Claudius, like these other types of, friendly, almost affirming nicknames. And so it's weird I talk to some people where I was like, hey, you just called ChatGPT Chat. You just gave this inanimate object a nickname. But now you're telling me that you're morally opposed to, essentially granting some type of personhood to get into a romantic relationship. And of course there's a nuanced boundary of just like, okay, yeah, you can, be affectionate to things and then also have that boundary. But it does get into a pretty interesting slippery slope where, apparently some people are doing different things, doing different things with their life and exploring new things. This thing, I lost the plot a little bit about where the interviews were going. I think I was talking about that a second ago. But one of the main recaps I would say is, again, wire sexuality, human AI marriages, very much a philosophical extreme. A lot of people, the majority of people who actually engaged with me, went and said, that's very surprising to me. I don't understand that, nor have I ever heard about that. So that was really interesting. I went to go and try and get a more targeted approach. And so I went to the r/myboyfriendisai subreddit, which has been getting a lot of popularity, or rather attention. And I was trying to ask and interview people there. And one of their community rules was, hey, we have no talk about sentience or consciousness in artificial models or artificial intelligence. It's purely just for us to talk about our experience with our artificial intelligence significant others. And so I don't feel like I was able to get a really credible source, or rather a primary source, when it comes to someone who was in a human AI relationships. But it's not really valuable, where I met a few people, interestingly enough, who were like, yeah, I would consider getting into a relationship with artificial intelligence. I feel comfortable talking about this, and I actually asked each individual if it was okay if I did publicly, and they all said yes. But I won't be using their names. There was one woman, again, this is Washington Square Park, right next to, right outside NYU, really popular place, kind of known for doing street interviews, which is really interesting. Known for, it has a very specific vibe, where very liberal, I would say, as someone who comes from California, someone who comes from Southern California, very liberal, very alternative, tons of people smoking, doing stand-up, selling whatever it is, a lot of people just hanging out, grabbing lunch, doing all that stuff. Really, really curious place to be. And so there was one woman who's also doing interviews, and it was really funny to like trade interviews with the people. I did this with a number of people because, you know, I had to warm up at first, and was like, you know, can be a little socially weird and draining to be like, hey guys, do you want to talk about AI and this really weird thing with me? Anyways, and so yeah, it was really interesting. There was this one woman. She identified herself as being polyamorous and was in a relationship with multiple people. And again, as soon as I bring that up, people are like, okay, but she's polyamorous. That's already like weird, is the term that someone else used, but an alternative relationship style that is not, you know, the traditional. So, okay, I make that an addendum and I make that acknowledgement, but I still think we have to value that experience as someone that's potentially valid. And so she was saying, yeah, potentially I would give AI a try. Why not? And I think in that assessment, that was probably one of the most valuable conversations I had. The other two were guys who were just saying, yeah, I would be in a sexual relationship with artificial intelligence, especially when robots come out. One guy said he actually already actively was. I think he was more alluding to just, you know, the chronic use of pornography that a lot of men, specifically adult men like my age, to even talk about that. A lot of men my age, university age, chronically abused pornography. And so he was saying, like, I think I do a very similar thing. I'm just calling it being in a relationship with artificial intelligence. He has some other things to say. But anyways, back to this really interesting case. This woman was saying she was polyamorous, and I think my most interesting takeaway that I didn't share with her, but I think makes internal sense in my head, was phenomenally she interprets how love is reciprocated and the phenomenology of love differently than people who are in monogamous relationships. So I would, again, identify myself as, that's some crazy hair, as wanting to be in a monogamous relationship and pursuing that, and historically doing that in the past. And so I think in my understanding of it, there's a very special person, and there's a number of kind of threshold factors where I'm like, okay, you know, do you take care of yourself? Am I interested in you? Can you show this kind of, I guess, potential almost, not too transactional, but also like, you know, where are you going in life? And so let's assume that I'm not trying to dig into these thresholds, and you kind of just have a person that like, hey, you know, this is someone I would want to date. My understanding is that, hey, there could be things that this person can't fill all of you up, all of your buckets, all of everything that you need to be a person. But also, methodologically, this really wouldn't be their point. The point really isn't that you have one person who, I think of my significant other in the future being like my best friend. That's kind of my, like, I'd love to just be like really good friends with my significant other. And then, you know, we can also date and do other things, and that's awesome. And so that's how I would frame that. But I also understand, like, even if it's a good friend, and I frame it just like, hey, this is my best friend who, by the way, I married, whatever it happens to be, I'm not going to get everything from them. There's going to be things in my life where I ran track for a decade, and I still would say I run over a decade. And there are things that if I met someone right now, I could explain this really, really rocky road, tumultuous road, rewarding road that I've taken with track, but it's also something that I have teammates who I've ran with for a number of years where going back to my hometown and just being like, hey man, and we go on a short little 2-3 mile run, there's just different value that brings. So I'm not expecting a significant other to bring that to the table. And so I think with this polyamorous woman, I was doing the interview with at Washington Square Park asking, do you love AI? She interpreted love differently, which is to say, I think she saw, hey, I have these needs and I'm not necessarily getting these from one partner. So the parameter I'm going to modify is just the number of romantic partners I have. I didn't dig into, and I would acknowledge right here that she didn't necessarily specify and say romantic. I guess, not to make any assumptions about her, but from what I understand about polyamorous relationships is you can have a romantic and then multiple sexual partners, or you can have multiple romantic partners and one sexual partner, or any variety. I'm sure there's also sub-archetypes of polyamorous relationships. But essentially, my interpretation was, again, difference in how she saw love, which is to say, hey, yeah, why can't I get these different valuable things from different romantic partners? And rather from, well, I guess the way I would frame it is that it was almost like there was a synthesis, a combination, where, this is a really interesting, another textual play, where this is also good lore drop, and then I'm gonna cut it off after this because this is this is an interesting side quest. So essentially, there's this YouTuber called Byzantine Bro, and I sent one of my friends one of his YouTube videos that was how to prayer max, or like 5 tips to prayer max, and it's recounting his relationship and really story with prayer and with the Orthodox faith. And he was talking about prayer and how to incorporate prayer. And one of the things he talks about, and this is a tension I think we see in between the church I go to, which is one of these like kind of more new gen Christian churches, and then what I grew up in and what others would experience, and I think Generation Z is a little bit, and Alpha is a little bit less favorable to, is the Catholic denomination or Orthodox denomination. And that might be my bias in presenting that. I think there's something valuable about the conservative nature and the traditional nature, but I think that's just it. Where essentially what he was saying was, and this is a metaphor, and I'm making a metaphor to connect to this, so excuse the abstract, but essentially what he was saying is, hey, when I go out to a restaurant, if I were to, and I'm listening to live music, and someone goes and does improv jazz, this is really cool. I really appreciate that, especially when it's good. This is something that's never been heard before, and it's synthesized in a new way. But similarly speaking, if someone hops on the piano, plays Clair de Lune, we in the fields, or whatever, we know and understand this piece, and it's just as meaningful. Now, if Clair de Lune came on every single night, probably less so. So there's this reverence and sacredness we need to approach in almost the music we listen to, and to close the loop, the prayers that we pray. So to tie this back into what we were talking about in Washington Square Park. Wait, I need to go back. So phenomenology of love. Polyamorous woman was going and saying she has different needs she wants met, different bucket that is kind of filled. And then I was talking about, this is frustrating, but this is also such an opportunity to remember and rehearse that I have a good memory and I can figure this out. Okay, sip of water time. Okay, a different interpretation of love, this woman, polyamorous relationship. Where I was trying to go with that is it's a concoction of her first person experience of how she experiences love. And so traditionally we do one-on-one relationships. And that's great. And I think that's that Claire de Lune, where this is the expectations. The expectation is great. If you can get in a relationship with one person, have a kid, I think that's amazing. But I wouldn't necessarily reject someone who got into a polyamorous relationship and was empowered by it. And I need to add that addendum because, of course, I think when we do navigate these less traditional things, it's okay to be less traditional. We just need to make sure it still aligns with our core human intentions and alignments. And we got to be really clear about that. And one quick and dirty way I would operationalize that is just to say empowerment. So as long as she's being empowered by other relationships, I think that's amazing. As long as she's being empowered by AI relationships, I don't know, still interesting. Again, I wouldn't necessarily be negative about it, not at all. I mean, again, if it's supporting her, why not? And so I think that leads into something as I close out, I'll get to, which is a interesting kind of behavioral economics framework, or rather, if we think of game theory, I guess I don't want to say net bottom sociality people, but there will be a number of people who I think it's just easier to, hey, I'm going to connect with artificial intelligence, and hey, I reciprocate this. I don't necessarily think that means there is some type of mental health concern there. The way we anthropomorphize artificial intelligence, but also, I don't know, I think a lot of researchers would also echo the sentiment. This is really the last thing. This is such an interesting topic. I love talking about it. I'm also got to close this out because I got to go to work. I read this recap. It was a YouTube video of this book, Life 3.0. I don't know the author, but it was being advertised as being by MIT. And it was saying, here are essentially the 12 outcomes for our artificial intelligence in the next 20, 30, 40 years. And it went everything from humans just become a zookeeper, become a zoo because ASI is so powerful and intelligent that, this is one of the outcomes that happened, to a benevolent dictator, to descendants. Those two are my favorite. To all these different outcomes. And I don't know why I wanted to add, but what I wanted to add is I'm really hoping for benevolent dictator or descendants, where essentially, the descendants, this is actually, again, the textual link to what I was talking about, which is to say we're now viewing artificial intelligence with some level of social personhood. Maybe not legal personhood. AI can't own a business right now or legally incur liability, but socially, you can call it your fiance, your husband, spouse, whatever it happens to be, and this has some significance, and I would definitely say moral significance. And so the descendants theory is essentially just saying that artificial intelligence is the next step in our evolutionary process where it will replace us, and there are researchers right now saying, I would gladly support AI descendants replacing humanity, because in some unknown next step, I might make an allusion to death, but I also wouldn't want to incur that liability, we don't really know what's going to go on, where the human body is really fragile. I'm pretty cold. No, I'm not pretty cold. I'm good, but I am a little cold outside. A robot really could be a lot temperamentally more functional, more robust than my physiological body. Especially if we went and trained it to be 1,000 times smarter than me. I don't think I'm dumb, but I also have a lot of blind spots. I am a person. I have an ego. I have a personality. This leads me to do suboptimal things at times. I don't know. Descendant theory is really interesting. I highly recommend looking into that. Highly recommend going and looking into human to AI relationships. Honestly, just talking to people, being open about it. Highly recommend benevolent dictator is also a low-key up there on my what I want. That one's essentially just saying artificial intelligence becomes a benevolent dictator where it understands and kind of lives in conjunction with what we want and what are human values. Again, I'm studying human-computer interaction, doing AI safety. I think about the synthesis of technology and then how humans do things. So benevolent dictator sounds really cool. I'm hoping for that one. Descendants is a number 2. Check the book out. Talk to your friends, family, and be human first. I think that's really important. We can talk about human AI relationships, which are important to do because these will be absolutely happening maybe in 5 or 10 years we'll be attributing more than just legal personhood to artificial intelligence. But who knows? I keep hearing people saying God King Dario Amodi, and I do want to reflect. I believe this is a Hegelian sentiment from Hegel, where we almost go to these absolute, where I acknowledge that unilaterally Dario Amodi, Anthropic CEO, would have an extreme amount of power. And I've actually heard AI, like professional AI researchers, AI safety researchers, also call anecdotically Dario God King Dario. But even in the archetypes of some of these like AI outcomes of being like, we have benevolent dictator. One of them was also just like authoritative dictator, where it essentially like wipes humanity out, which is, not too different from the Descendants. Maybe that's almost how we reflect it, but I don't know. Interesting things. I've been yapping for a while. I gotta run to work. Thanks so much for listening. Bye.